There are three main sulfur-related compounds in wine, but not all of them are true sulfites. Sulfites get a lot of rep, good and bad, and they seem to be largely misunderstood. Are they natural? Are they harmful? And are they really to blame for those dreaded wine headaches? Let's pour into the science and sort myth from truth. Welcome back to the VINVERITY Show. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today to discuss the truth about sulfites in wine. Let's get right into this highly debated topic by starting with those three main sulfur-related compounds. First up, we have sulfur powder. This is an elemental powder dusted on vines. This protects them from botrytis and other molds. This form of sulfur is not a sulfite, and it's not present in the finished wine if properly handled. However, if residues remain on grapes at harvest, they can contribute to unwanted sulfur compounds during fermentation, like H2S. Now, sulfur dioxide, SO2, is a true sulfite, and this is commonly added during winemaking in various manufactured forms, but it's also naturally occurring in small amounts as a byproduct of fermentation. SO2 additives serve as antioxidants, antimicrobials, and preservatives, and they are entirely different from the sulfur powder that's used in the vineyard. So these sulfiting agents are produced by burning fossil fuels and smelting mineral ores that contain sulfur. And they come in various forms, including tablets, gas, liquid, and powders. SO2 is a powerful antimicrobial. Like a potent antibiotic, it knocks out microbes of all kinds, and it protects wine from oxygen. This also gives winemakers control over not only risks of undesirable bacteria and oxygenation, but also by allowing them to suppress wild yeast and instead use commercial strains. This helps them to produce a consistent style year after year, but also controlling the length of fermentation. Certain yeast strains ferment quicker or slower and up to different alcohol levels and more. Controlling fermentation speed matters for producers who need efficiency. By managing fermentation, wineries can move wines to market sooner, generate cash flow more quickly, and avoid waiting for fermentation to unfold entirely on its own timeline. But consistency and control come at a cost. Heavy sulfiting can strip a wine of its vibrancy and its character, leaving it feeling somewhat flat. That's why some winemakers keep additions minimal or even skip them entirely, though even many natural winemakers still use a final little dose at bottling to make sure the wine ships safely. So hydrogen sulfite, H2S, is a different sulfur compound. It's typically formed in trace amounts by yeast under stress. Grapes produce different formations of a whole group of sulfur compounds called thiols or mercaptans. Many of these compounds are undesirable, producing aromas like burnt rubber, matches, or rotten eggs. However, at low levels, some of these compounds are attractive and even attributed to mineral aromas and flavors. For example, the chalkiness of Chablis is largely a result of hydrogen sulfide. Grapefruit, coffee, and chocolate are other common aromas and flavors resulting from thiols. These sulfides are generally controlled naturally during fermentation. However, if they become excessive, intervention is typically achieved through microoxygenation. Humans can detect sulfur compounds of this type at very low levels, with concentrations as low as parts per billion detected. For example, the natural gas in your home has a distinct smell, which is not naturally occurring. A mercaptan is added in small amounts so that if gas is let on, the smell is detected. Sauvignon Blanc's extreme flavor is a perfect example of the effects that naturally occurring sulfur compounds have on wine. The pronounced flavor is a result of the compound 3-mercaptohexanol. Interestingly, there is virtually none of this compound present in the actual grape. A set of complex steps produces 3-mercaptohexanol, which is a discussion for another day. Some varieties, like Syrah, have specific aromas derived from a sulfur-containing compound called a dimethyl sulfide. DMS can give aromas of coffee, blackberry, and hay, and these compounds are all very volatile. If levels are too high, they create undesirable effects on flavors and aromas. So, conventional wine producers can remove the risk of these undesirable traits by heavily sulfiting at all stages of winemaking and controlling fermentation with Lapa yeast strains, among other measures. However, when a wine is subjected to excessive SO2 additions, wine can lose its liveliness and depth, rendering it somewhat flat. There's quite a bit of dialogue that exists regarding the use of sulfites since Roman times. But there is research that rejects this narrative, like Dr. Patrick E. McGovern, who's the scientific director of the Biomolecular Archaeology Project for Cuisine, Fermented Beverages, and Health at the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia. And he discusses his research on sulfites in his book, Ancient Wine: The Search for Origins of Viniculture. While sulfurous fumes may have been used incidentally to clean vessels in antiquity, intentional sulfur use as a winemaking technology didn't emerge until much later, most clearly in the 17th to 18th centuries with Dutch traders. Other historians like Rod Phillips, Hugh Johnson, and Tim Unwin all note that sulfur belongs to the rise of modern wine commerce, not Roman winemaking tradition. It was at this time that Dutch traders introduced the practice of burning sulfur wicks in wine barrels for sanitization and to help stabilize the wine for transport. But this sulfur used back then was elemental, which is a very different story compared to forms of sulfur that we see today. Sulfites today were introduced as a byproduct of the petrochemical industry in the 1900s. And then suddenly we have industrial SO2 everywhere. Today, sulfites can be added at virtually every stage of winemaking, starting from use on harvested grapes throughout the entire winemaking process and at bottling. Moving on to sulfites and our health. Are sulfites the culprit for wine headaches, and are they bad for you? Regulators say that sulfites are safe at controlled levels, but recent research suggests that they can damage beneficial gut bacteria, even at those deemed safe concentrations. And as for the headaches, it's not so simple. Yes, there are some people who are sensitive to sulfites, with reactions that range from hives to breathing difficulties. But most wine headaches are probably from other culprits like histamines, tannins, residual sugar, the alcohol itself, or the cocktail of 70 plus additives allowed in conventional winemaking. So it's really hard to point the finger of blame just at sulfites. Unfortunately, wine labeling laws are extremely flawed. By law, a wine label must say contains sulfites if the level is above 10 milligrams per liter. That includes wines with naturally occurring sulfites, even if the winemaker never added a drop. Meanwhile, a heavily manipulated wine loaded with additives, including sulfites, can get away with telling you almost nothing. It's common for naturally occurring sulfites to reach up to 40 milligrams per liter, whereas the permitted added amount is 350 milligrams per liter in the United States. So the next time that you see contains sulfites on a label, just know that this isn't telling the full story. So how can you tell a wine's sulfite philosophy just by looking at the shelf? The honest answer is that you usually can't. But over time, by asking questions, paying attention, and doing little winemaker and importer research, you start to learn which producers you can trust. And that discovery process is actually part of the joy. Once you begin learning what truly goes into a wine and who's behind it, you realize just how special wine can be. On that note, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're enjoying uncovering the truths of wine with me. If you'd like to keep learning, subscribe to our newsletter for weekly wine sips and offerings. And until next time, in wine, there is truth.